Hi everyone, welcome to another 7-minute software video. Today we're going to look at moving vector drawings from one software to another. Specifically, we're going to look at going from Rhino into Illustrator. Now this is a common workflow because sometimes you might want to draft something very precisely in CAD software like Rhino and then post-process it or stylize it in a drawing software like Illustrator. Illustrator has a lot of tools to work with hatches and colors that might be useful for presentation drawings or illustrations of any kind. I'm going to show you 2 ways to do this, and I'll discuss the pros and cons of each one. So let's get started. Let's open up Rhino and make sure that our units are set to the units that we want to draw in. So I'm going to set my units to inches and my layout to inches as well. To start with, let's draw some precise shapes in Rhino. So now I've got a collection of shapes, and I want to give each of those shapes a different line weight. We do this by separating each shape into a corresponding layer so that the line weight is determined by the layer that the object is on. So now that we've got all of our objects on different layers, we can now send this drawing to Illustrator to stylize it or add more details. Now one way that we can do this is by selecting everything that we want to export into Illustrator and going to File, Export Selected, and we can use the Illustrator extension to output a file that is compatible with Illustrator. I'm going to click Save Geometry Only so that I make sure that only the geometry is being saved in this file. And now here's the important part about this method. The software asks you to specify a specific scale. Now if we select 1:1, our drawing will come in at 1 inch equals 1 inch. Sometimes you might want to represent things at 1:1 scale, but more often than not, you'll probably want to scale it at a specific ratio. Now for things like architectural design, you're always representing something at a smaller scale. But for now, let's just say that this method is the best for sending a drawing that you're going to represent at a 1:1 scale. So I'm just going to keep this as 1 inch equals 1 inch. Now let's head over to Illustrator. So in Illustrator, I'm going to open that AI file that we just exported. And immediately, something that you'll notice is that the artboard that comes with that file is set to the default artboard, usually 8.5 by 11. And so our drawing is much bigger than the page because it was exported at 1:1, and our bounding box is at 36 inches by 36 inches. So one thing that you will have to do if you're making a drawing at 1:1 scale is scale the artboard in Illustrator. We can do this by going to Document Setup, Edit Artboards, and select our artboard and change the width and the height, and then click Done. So the next thing we'll have to do is probably align our drawing with the artboard that we've just created. Our layers from Rhino actually get turned into Illustrator layers, which is very useful because then we can turn things on and off, and we can lock elements, and we can start to apply colors and line weights. So that's a pretty straightforward method. But again, this method really works best when you're working with something at a 1:1 scale. When you're scaling objects at, for example, an architectural scale, you probably want to use a different method. And so I'll go into that now. So let's go back to Rhino. And what we're going to do is actually scale the drawing in Rhino using the layout views. This is similar to how architectural drawings are made. So our drawing is at 1:1 scale in this virtual space. But Rhino's got this layout tool that allows you to create pages similar to how you would do it with Illustrator. And so let's create a new page that is 8.5 by 11. We're going to place this drawing on a page in Rhino at a particular scale. So we're not going to represent this at 36 inches by 36 inches. We're going to scale it down so that it fits our 8.5 by 11 page. And to do this, we select the detail view, which is a kind of bounding box that frames your drawing. And we're going to go to the object properties, and we're going to set the scale here. So 1 inch on the page is going to equal a certain ratio of the inches in the model. And so let's just say it's going to equal 8. So 1 inch on the page equals 8 inches in the model. I find it most useful to actually set the line weights in Rhino so that you get a preview of exactly how the drawing is going to look. So let's go back to our layers and make sure that our line weights are set by layer for each of our lines. Now to see a preview of what this line weight is going to look like, you want to go to View, Print Preview. And so now I know that these different shapes that I have on my board have different line weights. And I want this to come into Illustrator exactly at this scale and exactly in this position on the page. So what I'm going to do is actually print this page to a vector file such as a PDF. I'm going to go to Print, Rhino PDF, use the layout page, make sure we select Vector Output, And in our scale, we want to make sure that we're selecting this as 1:1. This does not mean that the drawing is 1:1, but rather that the page is 1:1. So we're going to get the exact proportions that we're seeing in the layout view, and everything else should be okay. So let's print this as a PDF and go into Illustrator. So let's open our PDF in Illustrator. And you'll see that the drawing has come in exactly as it looks in the layout view in Rhino. Now the problem here is that we don't have access to the individual layers that we did in Rhino. So if we want to post-process each individual element again, it's going to be kind of difficult. There's a really easy way to split these back up into their original layers. And we are going to do this by selecting the objects by their line weight. So the first thing that we want to do is create a new set of layers here in Illustrator that's going to mirror the layers that we had in Rhino. And one thing that you'll notice about PDFs that come from other software is that they have this thing called a clipping mask. And so you might have to select the border of the page and right-click it to release that clipping mask, because it kind of groups the entire page into one collection of objects. Now, depending on where you import it from, you might have to release multiple clipping masks. But after you've done that, you can just select that invisible box and delete it. And so now you should be able to select each individual object on the page. And to split these back up into their own original layers, we're going to select an object, and notice that it already has a line weight attached to it. That came from Rhino. So let's go to Select and go to Same. I recommend selecting by similar stroke weight. Now this is the only object on the page that has that similar stroke weight, so that's just going to be on its own layer. To move the object to a different layer, you can select this little icon here and just drag it onto another layer. And so now that object is in its own layer. Now let's select multiple objects. So I'm going to select this line and go back to Select, Same, Stroke Weight. And notice that it selected all of these other lines and that shape because those have the exact same line weight. And so I can select those and put those into their own layer just as they were in Rhino. I can do the same thing with these. Select, Same, Stroke Weight. And then I know that this one is by itself. And so now I've got full control over all of these vectors again, and I can paint them, I can hatch them, and I can post-process them as much as I want in Illustrator. And again, the important thing here is that the object came in exactly in the position on the page that it was laid out in Rhino. And so you can lay out an entire page of drawings in Rhino and post-process it all at once in Illustrator using this method. So hopefully this was useful for you. I'll see you next time.